Good morning. I would like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the City Governance Committee meeting of the 16th of February 2022, and I declare this meeting open at 11:57. I would like to advise attendees in the room that the meeting is being webcasted and audio recorded, and I remind attendees to practice social distancing and take the necessary safety precautions. Do any councillors have a leave of absence to declare? And I believe we are all sitting in the room, so we are fine. There is no leave of absence to record. Now, I would like to take this moment to welcome the CEO, Darren Scott, to the governance meeting. And with that, I will now refer to item 4.1. And can Mr. Darren Scott please enter discussions? And before we open discussion on this item, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being now, I will now refer to Mr. Scott to open public discussion.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the operational planned second quarter update for Council. So just some brief overview before we open discussion. There's 87 projects in the operational plan. At the end of quarter two, the health and the performance of the operational plan was at 89%. That is, of those 87 projects, 72 projects are running on track and 5 are completed. So since the end of the first quarter, a further 2 projects have been completed. Those 2 are the Economic Development Strategy Implementation and the Community Engagement Strategy Action Plan. 2 of the 6 projects that were in monitor, 3 are now back on track. That's the Delegations Review, the Waste Reduction and Recycling Strategy, and the construction of the outdoor event space, as you heard earlier today from Mr. Brown. There's 9 projects that are marked as monitor in this quarter, and you'll note that that in the report itself there's now a column in there about recovery actions. So that's something else you'll see in this report, that when there is something which we have a project which we have some concerns over and allocated as monitor, we'll also provide you with information about what we're doing to fix that. And so that'll be a consistent theme from here on. And those recovery actions will be applicable to that particular project. One of the ones in this is that we have a change in the target date. That's the Rosier Road Master Plan. This recovery action is difficult because we are reliant on the federal government, and EPBC approvals are not within our sphere of influence. So if I was going to put a flag on something which may be an ongoing issue, it's the ability to get that environmental approval. There's a couple of other projects of note that may raise discussion. One is the City of Choice, and the government responses we've had to the initial request for support in that respect, and we can have that discussion once we get there. The other one of note which I would highlight is one project which is recommended that be removed from the operational plan, and that is the Property Rating Strategies and Framework. And I think that's appropriate given the significant scope of this work, and that a more thorough analysis would be undertaken before we would offer anything to Council for their consideration. Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will now open the floor for councillors for discussion. Thank you, Councillor Kransky.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did actually flag this with the CEO prior to meeting, and I appreciate that we have the Director and Advocacy Lead in the room also. My question would relate to City of Choice initiative, and councillors would know that I've had an interest in this for quite some time. I just note from the report, Mr. CEO, that the status of this project has effectively shifted over the last 2 quarterly reports from not complete to now to monitor, and that the information provided within the report says that we are now looking at recovery actions with City of Choice with regard to city deals. I actually chased up yesterday with the chair regarding city deals, and he was unaware that this particular project was put forward for city deals. I don't know if the Mayor's office has been championing this, because I know typically they work with city deals, but I did follow up with the Mayor's Chief of Staff, and she was unaware of anything happening in that space. So how is it that the recovery item is actually pertaining to city deals?
Through you, Madam Chair, I might throw to Dr. Scott for that response.
Through the Chair, thank you, CEO. With identified the opportunity to, if the city deal does proceed, to engage in a conversation around the potential to leverage, if you like, the governance arrangements connected to the city deal to potentially support a version, if you like, of City of Choice going forward. It's an early opportunity that we wanted to flag with council, as opposed to providing a report first. It's not been identified previously because at the point in time when those previous reports were tabled, there was some significant uncertainty as to whether or not the city deal might actually proceed. There's now actually, as a result of deliberations between the respective levels of government and some announcements that we've been party to, a much higher level of confidence that the city deal is likely to proceed. And so as a consequence of that, we've flagged that potential in the report.
And just so I understand, so was this something the working group arrived at, that they would target the city? I'm just unsure what councillor engagement has been involved in this modification of approach.
I'll pass to Kirsten to provide a little bit more of a detailed update.
Thank you, Councillor. What the City of Choice was, when we had the discussion last year regarding it, the key attribute of City of Choice was that all three levels of government were participating in a collaborative process. And then we went through the working group, we wrote to the federal and state governments regarding support for City of Choice. We have had a response from the federal government, which didn't really go to signing an MOU, which is what we were proposing in relation to the new iteration of City Choice. And despite following up with the Premier's office, the Queensland Government, we have yet to receive a response to our letter from last year, which was sent around March last year. So we're seeing a reluctance from the federal and state governments to engage in that three-level collaboration on City of Choice as had previously been the case. So what we looked at, and this is just being flagged, is if this SEQ City deal goes ahead, that would provide the potential governance arrangement for the three levels of government to collaborate on jobs and job pathways, which was the kind of original rationale for City of Choice. So it's just flagging that as potentially we can go down that path. But one of the things that was in the original resolution was that if we were going to change the plan around City of Choice, we would come back to council with that plan. And because we're just waiting for all of the pieces of the puzzle to move into place, we haven't really come back to council and said, here's some options and potential strategies that we could pursue to achieve the same outcomes as what we were trying to achieve with City of Choice, but potentially through different avenues or a different vehicle. So that was trying to give an indication of we're waiting for this decision before coming back and saying, here's some options around what council can do. But as yet, no, we haven't obviously discussed it with council. We're just sort of saying, here's a potential, this is not a potential option, it's more of a, here's the timeline that we're waiting on before coming back to council.
The reinvigorated working group, how many times have they met with you now?
So they've only met once because, again, the outcome of that was that the advocacy program draft a letter, and letter was sent by the Mayor to the federal and state governments, and then we would engage with that working group once we had ascertained the response of those of both the federal and state governments. We've had the federal government response, we haven't had the state government response, so we haven't reconvened the working group. So we can do it early, but we're really doing a report for information, and we have had guidance that councillors prefer not to get information reports.
Can I just say that we have been actually going to engage with the state and federal government for 2 years on this project now. And the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and I actually met with the federal member for Ford, Mr Van Manen, who was leaning in, and he had been involved in the first 2 iterations of City of Choice and was very eager to find out what the 3rd iteration would look like. The Attorney General is Shannon Fentiman, and she was involved in the first 2 iterations of City of Choice also. and had been in contact with Councillor Redden and me regarding City of Choice. And when I transitioned from the working group, I had relayed that information to you, that they're both eager to find out what the third iteration of City of Choice would look like. I think it's unfair that this report would say the lack of interest from state and federal governments in participating in the third iteration of City of Choice, given that my experience is that they were actually very eager to be engaged and to be involved, but basically nothing was happening in that space. And I think that their enthusiasm has waned over the 2 years.
I can only say that the copy of the letter to the Prime Minister went to Mr Van Manen, and the copy of the letter to the Premier was sent to Minister Fenneman. We have had no engagement in that sense, and while it might be fair to say that those particular members are very enthusiastic about City of Choice, their opinions on the matter are something that they need to take into their respective governments to influence either in the case of the federal government, the Minister for Employment, and in the case of the state government, we're not quite certain where this has ended up within that.
With respect, Kirsten, I think that they feel that this has just stalled at Council's end. And it's unfortunate that they're named as a stumbling block in this report to this moving forward. But that's no further questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kransky. Councillor Stamp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to make a comment in relation to the item which is on Monitor, which is the project to deliver a host esports at the venues managed by Logan City Council. I know there's been some challenges with COVID and so forth, but I'm sure the Mayor would share my sentiment that we need to continue to put our support behind this project, because there's a lot of youth out there that don't play conventional sport, and I believe this is just really important. I just want to put my sentiment out there that it should continue, please.
I would agree with Councillor Stamp, and I actually wanted to ask the question if we do have a new proposed date for it yet, if anyone knows, but I think that will have to get taken offline because it's SLNA.
I don't think it's a proposed date as yet, but it'll be later in the year.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley. Sorry.
Thank you, through the chair. Excuse me. My hand went up when Councillor Kransky spoke about City of Choice, having been one of the few councillors who was here right from the start with City of Choice. I'm just curious if the time has come where it just needs to change. We've had COVID, we've had interests going elsewhere. And, maybe it's time to wrap it up, is my thought. And in relation to 4 information reports, I don't think it's been a councillor decision not to have 4 information reports. I believe it was from my recollection, the former acting CEO who determined that. But I might be wrong, but that was my recollection. I love 4 information reports. You just get so much information about what's going on in the organisation that you wouldn't normally get. The media often pick up on it. I would love to have 4 information reports come back, but that's just me.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. I believe that we actually have already made a resolution about the City of Choice very recently. Can you talk to that, Dr. Scott, and talk about the timeframes on that resolution?
Can excuse me, sorry, I have to take my glasses off to read. Yes, back in February, Council passed a resolution focusing, if you're happy for me to summarise, that the focus of any future initiative would be on jobs and job pathways, and that we would establish the working group. As Kirsten mentioned when she commented previously in relation to Councillor Kransky's question, that steering group, I should say, was established in March. And at the first meeting, the focus was in relation to the correspondence with state and federal governments. So at this point in time, the project, if you like, is not, or the initiative is not progressing, because the determination was it couldn't progress until we actually had established the condition precedent, which is the commitment of both state and federal governments to work with council to actually establish the next iteration of City of Choice with an MOU.
Perhaps then it's time that we ask the branch to follow up on the federal members regarding the City of Choice. Councillor Lane, did you have something to? No? Okay. Yeah. It was February last year that we passed that resolution.
That's correct. And we wrote to, as Kirsten mentioned, both state and federal governments in March. We have received a response from, as Kirsten also mentioned, the Minister Robert, which didn't indicate any interest in progressing with the Mayor's request for commitment to sign an MOU. We haven't received any response from the state as yet, but we have been following up diligently with the state every 3 months, and in fact most recently as 25th of January, and the state had actually indicated that they weren't responding and that they'd closed the matter. So that was the response that we received from the state at the time.
So perhaps that information hasn't been filtered down to us, which is why we're now wondering what's going on with the City of Choice. So possibly we need to work a way forward, because how long, with that resolution that we passed in February last year, what was the time span on that resolution?
It didn't have a time horizon. We were not progressing until we actually received responses from both state and federal government in order to be able to come back to council.
So coming back to council, so how long are we going to take before it comes back to council before we can move forward?
We were intending to come back in March with a report because we were hopeful that there was going to be a decision in relation to the city deal, which we thought that we could then provide some greater clarity to council on an opportunity to leverage the city deal governance regime to support City of Choice initiatives. So March at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bradley?
Thank you. My hand went up before Dr. Scott said what he said. I want to foreshadow in GB that a report be written with options for City of Choice going forward. I would like to foreshadow that.
All right. I'm thinking, yes, we can put that up, but then if it's also coming back to March, it might be more appropriate if it comes back to the March committee, and then we can actually discuss what to do with City of Choice then, rather than in this one.
Can I talk about it when general business comes up? Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have anything else to add for this one? Oh, Councillor Raven, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm aware that Dr. Scott is here presenting because of the operational plan, but City of Choice sits in advocacy, so it goes through the Planning and Economic Development Committee. So
I'll do it on Wednesday then.
yeah, GB would be better on Wednesday rather than hopping over committees. That would probably be the easier path. The state is exploring other options that are similar to City of Choice but not the same. Those conversations are very informal and very early on, but with Minister Fenneman, who would, I assume, be the reason why we're not getting a response back from the state, because they're considering other options. As soon as that gets to something where I can actually present it to councillors, I will, but at the moment it's literally conversations that may or may not relate to City of Choice. They seem to achieve very similar purposes, but there's no conversation with the feds on that at this time because they're about to enter election mode. So if we're trying to achieve all 3 levels of government, it's going to be tricky just before an election unless we just try to get opposition and government to agree to it and hope for the best.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add? No? Do I have a mover for the reports motion as displayed on the screen in front of you? Thank you. Councillor Murphy has moved the motion. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Bannon has seconded the motion. Does anyone else wish to speak to the motion? No, there being none, I will now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That has been carried unanimously. And that marks the end of Mr. Scott's first report. Did you have any general business for us? No? Perfect. Any general business for Mr. Scott before he leaves? No? Beautiful. We will move on. Thank you. I will now refer to item 5.1. We're just going to switcheroo with a few people. Now, we did have Mr. Thomas Brayley, who was going to be here in person, but he's not. He's actually online because he's at home ill. So he is online. And we now have Mr. Phil Nichols, who's the acting PLEAT program leader, who is joining us for discussions as well. Do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? No? Yep.
So just in order to correct the record, Tom is our close contact. He's not unwell, so he's very well and able to answer questions online, but he is a close contact, so he's in a bubble at home.
Hello, Tom. Can you hear us? Can you hear us at home? Perfect. I wasn't sure if I was saying ill or COVID or whatever. Thank you. Okay, so I will now refer to Mr. Nichols, who's going to open a public discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Mr Mayor, councillors. Councillors, can I take this report as read? It gives me great pleasure in presenting to Council the Sustainable Fleet Strategy 2021-2026 Green Fleet. The Sustainable Fleet Strategy journey began in 2019. However, due to COVID and the resulting change in the industry and behaviour of council vehicles and plant, the strategy timing was changed and it was parked until a realistic delivery on impact initiatives could be ascertained. The strategy focuses on 4 key objectives. It's to manage and minimise and control air pollutants and waste from vehicles, plant infrastructure used in council operations, manage driver behaviour that directly impacts carbon emissions, develop energy reduction strategies, and review the viability or alternate energy sources, and to drive cultural change, training and education. The strategy is listed in both the 2021 and 2022 operational plan and the 21 to 26 corporate plan as a major project under Focus Area 3, Environment. The strategy aims to balance the impact initiatives, projects and outcomes over the next 5 years and beyond, while still managing a strategic focus on Focus Area 1 of the corporate plan, maintaining current levels of service. It is an example of a strategy incorporating sustainability as a key policy position and has strong linkages to other council policies and strategies throughout. The strategy will be a document, a guide and a standard operating procedure to be used for direction setting, not only for Logan City Council's plant and fleet operations, but also for our contractors or our contracted plant and fleet operations. The document will form a foundation for future business planning, the operational plan and the corporate plan. Performance measurement tools are currently being developed by PFS Green Fleet team in consultation with Health Environmental Waste, IT and Business Transformation branches. Councillors, I'm happy to take any questions on the strategy. Also, Health Environmental Waste Manager Michael Asnikar is present to take any questions regarding the strategy for EV charge stations for the community.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Stemp who has some questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, first and foremost, I just wanted to say that I thought this was a very well-written report. I mean, honestly, you go through it and it's got really clear KPIs, and I just wanted to put that out there. I think it's one of the most well-written reports I think I've read in terms of, you know, getting the facts and getting understanding of where you want to go and what you're trying to achieve. I noticed it also mentions that the projects are mainly being funded through savings and budget, which again is really great. It mentions in there about some future projects that may require additional financial support, and I was just curious to get an understanding, even if not now, but in the future, like sooner than later, as to what sort of projects we're talking about. Are they big projects that we're going to need to fund in relation to this strategy?
Through the chair, one example could be EV charging infrastructure. There's some opportunity to have the infrastructure with an offset of marketing to offset the costs associated with that. But that's just one example of. Is there further, Tom?
We can't hear you. There you go.
Good afternoon, councillors. There's multiple projects that we're looking at that we do believe can be funded through savings. Some of those projects that we're looking at are going to be beneficial for learning opportunities. So green fleet learnings, vehicle driver behaviour learnings. We're developing training programs through the Logan Learning Hub. I know that we had a Chief Responsibility Officer, Drew, who was with the Workplace Health and Safety branch, and he started the development of that as part of our Green Fleet team, which Phil has taken over going forward. Other projects that we're looking at
Wonderful, thank you.
Just add to that as well. What we're seeing in this space, and Michael Asnakar's here as well, there is a fair few federal grants in this particular space as well, in terms of tapping into funding for various initiatives in this space. And also, just to remind Council that there is a plant fleet reserve that exists for the purchase of a small and heavy plant. So it's just a matter of that investment will be directed towards vehicles that are in line in relation to the sustainable fleet strategy moving forward.
Thank you. Just wondering if Mr. Asnakar could join us if he's got more information regarding the EV charging stations. Like, have we investigated where to place them, what the costing is, all the rest of it? Will that be?
All right. Thanks, Madam Chair. Morning, councillors. So what I can speak to is a piece of work that our branch has been doing in relation to identifying potential locations on council-owned land that may be suitable for the establishment of EV charging stations across the city. So that piece of work is underway. Obviously, we started with a matrix, a set of criteria, and we're starting to analyse different locations across the city with the intent to bring a potential list through ELT and then to council for consideration for the establishment of these charges down the track.
Awesome.
It's coming. In terms of time, I just finished that point. In terms of timing, I'd anticipate that we'd have a report to council around mid this year, and then once that's been endorsed by council in terms of locations, the other aspect that council will need to land on is our policy and business model around the establishment of these charging stations on council-owned land by installers, what that may look like in terms of the agreement that the council and the installer come up with.
And if and when they are installed, it would be a user pays scenario for them?
So all that business model arrangement will need to be considered. There are various options. So typically a user will pull into the EV charging station, plug in, and there'll be some sort of arrangement where it might be the first 15 minutes free, or it might be a pay as soon as you plug in. These are the sorts of options that that will be put to us and what council can consider as a reasonable model that it's happy with.
Thank you. Councillor Bradley, is yours directly on this? Okay, thanks.
Oh, my apologies, I didn't realise my mic was still on. It's a little bit about this and a little bit, I'm not sure if Tom can answer this, but it's pretty exciting. I just want to know where we sit in terms of other councils with all this.
Yeah, I can speak to that through the chair. I think that we're ahead of the I sit on the chair of the Institute of Public Works and Engineering Australasia Fleet Council, and I know that they're very interested in the progress that we're making, and also it will be something to be discussed at future conferences on how Lowry City Council are setting direction.
Awesome.
And being innovative in this space.
Okay, thank you so much for that. If I can carry on, I've had conversations with my state member about this. because it falls under his portfolio. And I was curious if any possible state or federal funding could be looked at down the track, because surely if we're leading the way, there might be an opportunity for piloting or something. I'm not too sure, but I just want to flag that, and I suggest that you do a media release, Chair. Just
Thank you. We have one booked in. Councillor Jeremiah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a great read of this document, and I think it sets out some really great aims. Right now, according to the document, only 0.5% of council's fleet is fully electric, but that's okay because the technology is developing, the technology is changing, and it's becoming more feasible as each day goes by. And my reading of this document is that it acknowledges that and it embraces that. Now, governments across Australia and across the world are taking steps towards incentivising electric vehicles. We can see on a federal level, the Labor Party, now in opposition, has committed to purchasing more electric vehicles in their federal government fleet if they win government. We can see in the US, the new administration, as John mentioned yesterday, under new leadership, has offered $12,000 as a tax rebate for people who buy American-made electric vehicles. It is the time to be transitioning away from our current fleet and transitioning towards a cleaner, greener fleet. And in order to make that change, there needs to be incentives to the market. There's a difference between fleet and between the public sites. And I wanted to ask Mr. Asnikar, when we look at other councils and we compare our performance with them, how do other councils use council land to have electric vehicle chargers on them? Does council go and pay for it and install it completely themselves? Or is there a different form of business model?
So without presenting some of the options that we'll put to council later on in the year, the most typical arrangement I've seen is that the council will offer a space and then the experienced EV infrastructure provider will install the infrastructure, operate and maintain it. So that's the typical arrangement, because council's expertise is not in necessarily installing an EV charger, but we can make strategic locations across the city available on land that council owns.
So one of the business models that of course will be presented in the future is that there's that installer and council just gives the land to the installer and they put it in to have a public charging site. And on that, Councillor Bradley asked about state and federal funding, because other governments are thinking the same way we're starting to think. I wanted to ask, is there any current federal government funding to encourage councils and to encourage those installers to have more electric vehicle charging sites in our city?
Short answer is yes, there is, and there was some funding released last year, and I understand that there is going to be more funding, and I'm talking in the order of millions, or I think it's tens of millions of dollars across the nation from the federal government to incentivise the installation of these charging stations across the country.
Thank you for that, Mr. Asnikar. And specifically, the federal government has offered $8.85 million to one of the many charging providers in our region called EV Networks, and they have chargers in places like Coomera and right next door, but not here. So it's time for council, and of course this is outside the scope of this fleet strategy because it's about public charging sites and they're very distinct two different things, but it's time for council to take advantage of that funding while it's there. It's not going to be there forever, and move fast to be able to partner with companies like EV Networks or ChargeFox or whatever comes up best to be able to have public fast charging sites in our city, and specifically at council venues, just like how the Brisbane City Council has them and just like how the Gold Coast City Council has them at places where there are council facilities like the Pimpama Sports Hub and all of their other pool type facilities. So I'm hoping that that report will see it soon, because we're taking a great step with the fleet, but now we need to focus on the public side of it and make sure that the public has available charging facilities, just like how the council fleet does. Thank you, Mr. Asnikar.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Murphy.
Thank you through the chair. To Tom and Phil, thank you for the report. I know, Phil, you were a bit nervous coming in to see us today, but you did a great job. And to Mr. Asnikar, we've been asking the question with regards to charges on council land for some time. Are the councillors able to just email you any suggestions with regards to council assets where we feel that this is a valid resource?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I'm happy to receive any emails from councillors. What we will do, of course, is once we have a short list, we will circulate that for feedback as well. So there'll be another opportunity to review, add, delete our initial shortlist. But if you want to proactively send me through some options prior to that phase, happy to receive them.
Okay, and if it is a council-owned asset, but there is already a leasee in place, then this is just done as a sub-lease to that section, or is that leasee going to be responsible for looking after that property?
Well, so these are exactly the circumstances and, details that we have to start considering once we identify potential locations, because it's easy to say, well, here's a car park, put it there, but there's these types of situations we need to get to the detail of, and then determine whether it's suitable, not suitable, or whether we can make some sort of alternative arrangement to make it work there.
Thank you.
Yep.
I will certainly be sending you an email with regards to some locations that I think are valid in Division 12. So thank you for your time. Thank you, Phil and Tom, for a great report.
Thank you. Awesome. Mr. Asnikar, I have a feeling you're about to get emails from a bunch of us about council assets where it would be awesome to put an EV charging station. And I think we're all looking forward to the report when it comes back. Thank you. Do I have a mover for the report? I've got Councillor Bradley moving. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please. Oh, does anyone wish to speak to it? No. Raise your hand if you're in favour of the motion on the screen. Thank you very much. That has been carried unanimously, and that marks the end of Mr. Nichols and Mr. Brayley from afar, their reports. Is there any general business for them? No? Thank you. You guys can go. Thanks, Tom, for joining us online.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you very much.
I will now refer to item 6.1, and I will ask Miss Caroline Bugg, Finance Manager, to enter the discussions. Before we open the discussions, does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare this morning? No? There being none. I do note that 6.1 does have confidential in it. It is considered necessary to take the discussion of this report into a closed session, as the confidential attachment contains detailed budget information. Do any councillors wish to move us into confidential? Thank you. Councillor Raven has moved the motion. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Karansky. All those in favour of moving into confidential, please raise your hand. Thank you. That has not been carried unanimously. Let me go around the room. Mayor Power, were you in favour then? Yeah. So I had Councillor Bradley, Councillor Lane, Mayor Power, Councillor... Oh God, I'm having a mental blank. Sorry, Mindy. Councillor Russell, all in favour. Councillor Raven's in favour. Councillor Hall.
Against.
Against. Councillor Fraser. For Councillor Heremiah.
Against.
Against. Councillor Bannon.
Against.
Thank you. And the remaining of us, we were all for it. So we will just move into confidential. We'll just wait for the recording to come back on. Thank you and welcome back. We now have a motion on the screen. If you could cast your eye over it. That was. Thank you. Do I have a mover for the motion that's on the screen? Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Lane has moved. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has not been carried unanimously. So, noting that Councillor Bradley has left the room. May I power your hand is up? Thank you. Councillor, oh my God, I'm having a mental blank. Councillor Russell. That's twice. Sorry. Did you put your hand up then? Did you vote in favour? No. Shush, Councillor Raven. Are you in favour, against, or abstaining?
Was this about, I'm going to say abstain.
Thank you. Do you want to put a comment or a reason? No, thank you. Councillor Stemp, how do you vote?
I'm against.
Was there anyone else that did not raise their hand then? Or the rest of us were all in favour? Yep, noting that Councillor Bradley left the room. Thank you very much. That motion has been carried. And we will now move on to item 6.2. And before we open discussion, do any councillors have a conflict of interest to declare? There being none, I do note that it is considered necessary to take this discussion of this report into closed session, as it does have confidential report attached to it, and it includes private and personal details. Do any councillors wish to move into closed session? No? I just remind councillors that if we don't move into confidential, just to a reminder about that when we do move into discussion. So thank you, and I will now hand over to Ms. Buck.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6.2 relates to the write-off of a debt, ledger number 147223. I take the report as read. As noted in the report, a significant effort has been made to locate the debtor. Unfortunately, we've had no success in doing so, and therefore the next typical step for us from a legal perspective cannot be pursued successfully. It is now deemed uneconomical to pursue the debt any further, and we request approval to write it off.
Councillor Lane, thanks.
Thanks very much. Carolyn, what happens if the debtor pops back up miraculously after, let's say, 12 months?
I would quite happily re-invoice and pursue that debt.
So you can do that even though we're moving to write it off? Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Banham.
Thank you, through the Chair. This one's a bit left field. Is there any way, like I know with Queensland Tolls, who are a private company, the state government put them on, if you owe the Queensland Tolls and don't pay your toll bill, you go on to Spur, which eventually results in you losing your licence. So I know that states aren't supposed to chase up money for private companies, but they do because they do it for Queensland Tolls. So is there any way that we can tap into that? So if someone of this sort of circumstance happens again, and we can't chase, or it's too much for the ratepayer, that we do what the state government do with Queensland Tolls, and we just put that onto the Spur bill. Because I know that with the Queensland Tolls, they get paid, it goes on Spur, and Spur chase it up. But the Queensland government the Queensland Tolls get their money. We're not a private company, so it should be easy for us. Is there any? I know it's left field, but is there any way that can be done so they can't get away? It's on their Spur.
I've got this one. Thanks for the left field question. My initial gut feel is that Spur are there to deal with penalty infringement notices and traffic offence notices, Councillor Bannon. But I will take that one on notice. I will find out for you and report back to council.
Thank you. And I just had one other question. I note that we did try to send the bill. Did we try and do it through registered mail as well? That's just the only question that I had.
We actually went and knocked on doors looking for the debtor. There was no response to where we believe he could be. Registered, they can return registered mail as undelivered. It doesn't actually produce the result that we were looking for.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions regarding this? All right, there is a motion on the screen. If you cast your eye over it. Do I have a mover for the motion that's on the screen? Councillor Raven has moved. Councillor Lane has seconded the motion that's on the screen. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. That has been carried unanimously, with the exception of Councillor Russell, who has left the room, and I remembered her name this time, and she's not even sitting there. My goodness. All right. I note that that is the end of Miss Bugg's reports. Do you have any general business for us today? No. Does anyone have any general business for Miss Bugg? Perfect, wonderful, thank you. You are free to go. And I note that due to social distancing restrictions, not all managers or staff could attend today. That being said, does anyone have any GB for Director of Organisational Services, Mr. Strachan? Do you have any for us? No, perfect. That completes our agenda for the day, and I declare the City Governance Committee meeting of the 16th of February 2022 concluded at 1:13 p.m. Thank you so much.